What if power had no boundaries, no morality, no restraint, no fear of consequence? Imagine a teenage emperor with the wealth of an empire, the whims of a child, and the desires of a god. This was Elagabalus, the boy emperor who turned Rome into a palace of excess, where peacocks danced in gold and eunuchs ran the halls. His reign was short, but scorched into history as one of the most scandalous, shocking, and surreal chapters in the Roman Empire. Born in 203 AD in the Roman province of Syria, Elagabalus was originally named Varius Aviatus Bassianus. He was a high priest of the sun god Elagabalus in Emesa, where religious ritual and divine decadence molded his earliest beliefs. His family belonged to the Severan dynasty, and his grandmother Julia Misa was the true architect behind his rise. When political chaos swept the empire after Caligula's assassination, Julia saw her opportunity and placed her 14-year-old grandson at the center of a calculated coup. The boy wore robes instead of armor, spoke in the language of mysticism, and claimed divine guidance. Soldiers, desperate for a savior, rallied around his name. With the help of Eastern legions and gold, Elagabalus marched toward power. He was declared emperor by the 3rd Gallic Legion, and after defeating Macrinus in 218 AD, he stepped into Rome not as a Roman, but as a foreign god-king. At just 14 years old, Elagabalus was thrust into the heart of a decaying empire. Rome, bloated from centuries of war and wealth, was vulnerable to charm and spectacle. The boy emperor, backed by his mother and grandmother, entered not with laws or reforms, but with incense and prophecy. Rome had seen ambitious generals, but never a divine adolescent whose every move was directed by omens and mystics from the East. Rome had seen mad emperors before, Caligula, Nero, but nothing could prepare the city for Elagabalus. He entered wearing silk and gems, his eyelids painted and his ears pierced, declaring his god Elagabalus superior to Jupiter. To the Senate and the Roman people, this was not eccentricity, it was sacrilege. His first act was to erect a massive temple on the Palatine Hill for Elagabalus, importing a black meteorite believed to be the physical manifestation of the god. Traditional Roman temples were soon desecrated or forgotten. Elagabalus merged Elagabalus with the Roman sun god Sol, demanding worship and sacrifices that shocked the Roman elite. He didn't just bring a god, he brought a revolution. He paraded the sacred black stone through the streets in a chariot drawn by naked women, dressed as the sun god's bride. He declared the Roman pantheon obsolete, and in their place proclaimed the supremacy of his Eastern god. This wasn't just heresy, it was war on tradition. The Vestals, the augurs, the ancient rites of Rome, all were cast into shadow by the emperor's fervor. The banquets of Elagabalus became legendary and feared. He hosted nightly feasts in marble halls, where guests reclined on leopard skin couches and ate gilded oysters, peacock tongues, and jellyfish in honeyed wine. Servants dressed as satyrs poured exotic liquors, while naked dancers spun beneath ceilings that rained rose petals. But beneath the glitter was cruelty. Elagabalus was infamous for practical jokes laced with sadism. He once released wild animals during dinner to terrify guests, and another time served rubber food to nobles he despised. No night was safe. One feast ended with the roof collapsing in an engineered avalanche of flowers that nearly smothered guests to death. Some dinners were spectacles of disguise. Guests arrive, expecting noble entertainment, only to be mocked or humiliated before hundreds. He held tastings where the wine was mixed with opium or pepper, just to watch reactions. Guests were never sure if they would leave the party drunk, humiliated, or not at all. Rumors whispered that some banquets ended in sacrifices. While Rome worshipped reason, law, and tradition, Elagabalus worshipped sensation. His palace became a temple of desire, where gender, class, and rank dissolved into a haze of incense and lust. He appointed lovers to senatorial positions and promoted eunuchs as sacred intermediaries of his god. The emperor was married at least 5 times, including once to a Vestal virgin, an act so blasphemous it nearly incited civil war. But his most famous partner was Heracles, a former slave and charioteer whom Elagabalus called his husband. Wearing bridal veils and female garments, he appeared in public as a bride, further shocking Roman sensibilities. He constructed secret chambers within the palace where pleasure reigned, where identity and hierarchy collapsed. He declared his body the vessel of the divine feminine. He sought physicians who could turn him into a woman and offered vast sums for such a procedure. To many, he wasn't just a madman. He was a blasphemy to both nature and Rome. To entertain Rome, Elagabalus went beyond the gladiatorial norm. He staged bizarre blood games, mock weddings that turned into executions, orgies interrupted by animal hunts, and races run by blindfolded nude senators. He ordered mass castrations in honor of his god and rewarded compliance with jewelry and land. Sometimes his cruelty was casual. He gave gold to beggars, then had them thrown off cliffs for amusement. He released poisonous snakes into the crowds during races and once flooded a banquet hall to simulate a sea battle, only to unleash live crocodiles among the diners. Rome had seen excess, but this was something far darker. He staged a performance where children were given birds sewn shut with burning incense. When they panicked and tore the birds open, the hall filled with smoke and screams. Another event saw him pit poets against each other, and the losers were beaten with scrolls dipped in lead. Pleasure and pain were twins in his empire. Elagabalus saw himself not just as emperor, but as divine medium. He demanded that senators observe Eastern rituals, including dancing and chanting, while he conducted sacrifices. He wore only silk robes and refused military armor, declaring that his god protected him. He would appear before crowds dressed in golden tiaras and perfumed tunics, blessing his subjects with oils. Rome watched in horror as ancient traditions were replaced with what they saw as foreign madness. For Elagabalus, it was not madness, it was cosmic destiny. But for the people, their emperor had become a parody of kingship. He built sacred spaces forbidden to all but his closest attendants, where blood rites were performed nightly. He declared the Roman gods mere servants to Elagabal and ordered coins minted with the Eastern sun god's face above all. He declared that the entire empire must align with the rhythms and seasons of Syria. The Roman Senate, already uneasy, began to stir with rebellion. Behind palace walls, whispers of treason grew louder. The emperor's unpredictability, his disregard for law, and his shameless extravagance had earned him enemies among Rome's most powerful. Even his mother, Julia Soaemias, who once championed his rise, struggled to control him. Letters passed in secret between generals and consuls. The Praetorian Guard, once loyal, was bribed and manipulated. The machinery of assassination had begun to turn. Senators who spoke against him disappeared. Generals who questioned his orders were transferred to the edges of the empire or found dead. The fear was total, but so was the contempt. Elagabalus had gone too far. He had made himself not just a tyrant, but an outsider in his own empire. In March of 222 AD, Elagabalus sensed danger. He tried to flee the palace disguised in servant's clothes, dragging his mother with him, but it was too late. The Praetorian Guard found him hiding in a chest. They dragged him through the streets, jeered at him, and executed him without trial. His body was mutilated, beheaded, and dumped in the Tiber River. His mother met the same fate. Rome rejoiced, believing a sickness had been purged. Statues of Elagabalus were torn down. His name was erased from inscriptions. It was a damnatio memoria, an official erasure from Roman memory. His golden halls were dismantled. The black stone of Elagabal was returned to Syria. The priests were killed or exiled. The eunuchs disappeared. In a single night, the empire severed itself from the boy it had once worshipped. But memories, unlike inscriptions, cannot be erased so easily. With the death of Elagabalus, his cousin, Severus Alexander, was declared emperor. A return to order, discipline, and Roman values was declared. The temples were purified, the palace servants dismissed, and the sun god Elagabal was sent back to Syria. But the taste of chaos lingered. Rome had seen its ugliest desires laid bare in its highest office. Though his reign was brief, Elagabalus revealed how easily civilization could tip into spectacle, how empire and ego could blend into dangerous myth. The next emperors ruled more cautiously, but the memory of Elagabalus remained a shadow, a lesson in what happens when the divine and the depraved collide on a throne of gold. His legacy lived in whispers and in the nightmares of senators. Ancient sources like Cassius, Dio, Herodian, and the Historia Augusta wrote of Elagabalus with disgust, but also fascination. Their accounts, though biased, speak to a larger anxiety. What happens when the emperor becomes the god? When appetite replaces law? Some modern scholars argue that Elagabalus was a product of cultural misunderstanding, a figure caught between East and West, tradition and transformation. Others see him as Rome's ultimate warning that decadence, left unchecked, breeds ruin. What's undeniable is that the story of Elagabalus is not just history, it is mythology in motion, a story retold for centuries, distorted by moralism and fear, but impossible to ignore. He remains a figure both monstrous and mesmerizing. In modern times, Elagabalus has been reinterpreted as one of the earliest recorded figures who challenged gender norms openly. Some accounts suggest he sought surgical transition, referring to himself as a woman, even asking to be called Empress. For LGBTQ historians, Elagabalus is both tragedy and icon, destroyed not just for excess, but for daring to live authentically in a world of rigid identity. His story forces us to reconsider how we define madness, rebellion, and visibility in history. He is a subject of plays, paintings, academic debates, and documentaries. He is a symbol of power without limits and of selfhood in defiance of empire. Elagabalus is no longer just a footnote. He has become a lens for how we view history itself. Elagabalus may have been erased from Rome's marble, but not from its memory. His story remains one of the most extreme examples of power unbound by tradition and desire unleashed without limit. His reign was brief, but the questions it raises are eternal. What do we do with leaders who don't follow the rules? How does civilization survive when its rulers reject civilization itself? In Elagabalus, we find not just a mad emperor, but a mirror of what lies beneath power, pleasure, and the human need for control. History is not always written by the victors. Sometimes it is written by the shocked. Elagabalus left behind no victories, no laws, no reforms, only memory soaked in perfume and blood. And yet, we remember him, not for greatness, but for the chaos he unleashed. Until next time, stay curious and beware the empire built on pleasure alone.